All right, guys. So Trump recently made an appearance at this so-called Fighting Anti-Semitism event. And at this event, he was speaking alongside Miriam Adelson, who, if you guys remember, is the wife of the now dead Sheldon Adelson, who is a right-wing, pro-Israel billionaire mega donor who gave hundreds of millions of dollars to Trump and Republicans throughout the last number of years. And Miriam is now stepping in to fill that spot and is set to give $100 million to Trump's campaign. So he comes to this event here to basically show off how anti-Palestinian and subservient to Israel he will be as a potential future president, right? Keeping in mind that during his first presidency, he moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. He recognized Israel's illegal occupation of the Golan Heights. He did the Abraham Accords. He ripped up the Iran nuclear deal. He did everything he possibly could to bend over backwards in service of the Israeli government. And I don't think that it's any sort of mystery why that was the case, given the kind of cash that we're talking about here. Now, let's go ahead and jump into this first clip where Trump basically just openly admits, this is a perfect example of him saying the quiet part out loud when it comes to the influence of the Israeli lobby. So let's go ahead and watch this first clip here.
Israeli territory, who would believe this, as Hamas wages a savage war in the south, Hezbollah menaces the north, and the Houthi terrorists attack at sea. In Europe, the streets of Paris, London, and Brussels are overrun by mobs of Hamas supporters changing their jihad slogans in the heart of the Western capital. And in America, the evil anti-Semitism is rampaging all throughout our cities, the Democrat Party, our left-wing media institutions, a certain candidate for the President of the United States, which is hard to believe, in our colleges and universities, they're going loco. They're going loco. Something's wrong with them. What is this? I never thought this could happen. You know, just to get off for a second, years ago, my father was a big supporter of Jewish people and Israel. He's not Jewish. He wasn't Jewish, but he was a great friend of a lot of Jewish people. And if you say, let's say 15 years ago, maybe not even that long, anything bad about Israel or Jewish people, you were finished as a politician, right? We were finished. You wouldn't do that, Congressman. You wouldn't do it anyway, but nobody would do it. The most powerful lobby in this country, by far, was Israel and Jewish people. Today, it's almost like, what happened? What happened? What happened to Schumer? What happened to all these people? Schumer's like a Palestinian, right?
Okay, so what the fuck? There's a lot going on there. First off, the last thing that he said, something that he's been doing repeatedly recently, is using the term Palestinian as a slur. He's using Palestinian as like an adjective to describe somebody in a negative way. Schumer is like a Palestinian. Put aside the fact that Schumer himself happens to be Jewish, right? But he's now become like a Palestinian, is what Trump has to say about him. Now, that ties into the second thing I was going to say, because his main thesis here is not only are, anti-genocide campus protesters or people who have been protesting out in the streets calling for an end to this death and destruction that we've all been seeing in Gaza over the last 10 months, not only them, not only with the universities and the media and everything, but also with the Democratic Party. He's framing them as being like radical pro-Hamas anti-Semites. Guys, who has been the president for the last 10 months? Has it been a Republican or has it been a Democrat? It's been Joe Biden, who has been fully subservient to everything that Israel has wanted to do for the last 10 months. And by the way, it's not even as if before that he was undoing any of the Trump, changes, whether it's moving the embassy or whether it's the Abraham Accords or the Iran nuclear deal. He was continuing with pretty much all of those same policies from what Trump did. But after October 7th, what has happened under Joe Biden's leadership? Well, we now have minimum, and this is a strong minimum here, 40,000 who have been killed. Vast majority of them being innocent women and children. Obviously, innocent men would be included in that number as well. They have completely obliterated the healthcare system, the education system. They've attacked schools and mosques and churches and refugee camps and UN shelters, everything under the sun. They have destroyed a majority of the housing in Gaza, displaced almost the entirety of the population. People have been starving because Israel has been blocking the aid from getting in. And this has all happened under Joe Biden. a Democrat, a self-proclaimed proud Zionist Democrat. So the notion that like Democrats are all radical, pro-Hamas and anti-Israel or anti-Semitic, what are you talking about, man? What world are you living in? This is a unanimous bipartisan thing when it comes to U.S. politics, is that if you are critical of Israel and you are an elected member of our government, the pro-Israel lobby, I wouldn't call it the Jewish lobby, he's calling it the Jewish lobby, which, by the way, I think is anti-Semitic, but we'll circle back around to that. But the Israeli lobby will go after anybody who is a critic of the government of Israel. We just saw this with Cori Bush, for example. We just saw this with Jamal Bowman, for example. In just those two races combined, AIPAC, which is just one lobbying group, dumped tens of millions of dollars into those races, into Democratic primary campaigns, not even general elections, primary campaigns for House seats to target some of the only, and this is really just like a handful, of the critics that were elected to our government when it comes to Israel, right? Ilhan Omar thankfully won her race. I think AIPAC actually sat that one out. But this is what they do. He's not wrong, in other words, about the power of the pro-Israel lobbying groups, right? And by the way, I think it's the largest actually, but at least one of the largest pro-Israel lobbying groups is actually Christian fundamentalists, right? It's not even Jewish people. It's backed by Christian fundamentalists who have their own fucked up, warped view about the second coming and the end of times and what that has to do with Israel. But the idea that like he's going to sit up here and think fondly of that reality. He's saying, well, a couple years ago, you couldn't say anything negative about Israel without it being the end of your career. Well, I mean, I would argue, again, right now, given what we see with the hundreds of millions of dollars that are spent by pro-Israel lobbying groups, that's kind of still the case now, but he's thinking about this fondly. He's in favor of a reality where a foreign government, okay, or lobbying groups that are working on behalf of a foreign government can influence U.S. politics so strongly that if anybody criticizes that foreign government, then they can easily be removed from power. And he's in favor of that. He thinks that's a good thing, right? So I think it should tell you a little bit about where Trump stands on all of this, right? I've had my million plus one critiques of Joe Biden, of the Democratic Party when it comes to how they've handled this genocide. This guy, somehow, which should be impossible, but somehow is even worse on the issue. This is just American politics here, right? There are no pro-Palestinian, there are no real like Israel critics at the upper echelons of the Democratic or the Republican Party. Now, the last point before we move on to the rest of this is that it is incredibly rich that a guy like Trump, a guy who sat down and had dinner with an out-and-about neo-Nazi, Nick Fuentes, this guy is now going to preach about anti-Semitism. This guy is gonna talk down to anti-genocide protesters and call them anti-Semites for daring to be against the endless slaughter of innocent children. I mean, come on. And again, it is, I think, actually deeply anti-Semitic to lump Jewish people in as a monolith. That's what he's doing here. He's saying Chuck Schumer, who is a Jew, is actually more like a Palestinian now, somehow, even though he hasn't been that critical of the government of Israel. I think he's been somewhat critical of Benjamin Netanyahu, but he is a Zionist. But he's somehow now a Palestinian. So that's deeply anti-Semitic, right? Trump, who's not even Jewish, gets to decide who is and isn't Jewish based on whether or not they are fully subservient to what Israel is doing right now or at any given moment. That's anti-Semitism. Jews are not a monolith. There is a huge bulk of Jewish people in this country who oppose what Israel is doing in Gaza right now. Many Jewish organizations are leading some of the protests that I've been to. Jewish Voices for Peace, If Not Now. These are Jewish organizations that are leading some of these ceasefire protests. But he wants to lump them in as a monolith, as if all Jewish people have to think the same, all Jewish people are the equivalent to Benjamin Netanyahu or an IDF soldier or something like that. That's actual anti-Semitism, and it makes it basically impossible to address real anti-Semitism like the Nick Fuentes neo-Nazi types, because you're blurring the lines. You are destroying the meaning of anti-Semitism. Criticizing the government of Israel is not anti-Semitism. That is not anti-Semitic. But when you say that is, and when you call anybody who's a critic of Israel anti-Semitic, then it confuses people to the point where it becomes impossible to determine what anti-Semitism actually is or to take it seriously. But here we go. We continue. Because he also said this. He's going to deport the people who are not bending the knee, I guess.
When I'm president, we will deport the foreign jihad sympathizers, and we will deport them very quickly, and Hamas supporters will be gone. If you hate America, if you want to eliminate Israel, then we don't want you in our country. We really don't want you in our country. I will ban refugee settlements from terror-infested areas like the Gaza Strip, and we will arrest the pro-Hamas thugs who vandalize federal property and make really life very, very difficult in this country for a lot of people.
So he's going to deport the pro-Hamas, pro-jihad, anti-Israel people. He's going to round them up and deport them, whatever that means. Is he talking about Americans here? Is he talking about Muslim immigrants? What is he talking about here? I don't even know, because just in the last clip that we were just watching, he was referring to the college students who were protesting against the genocide, and he was referring to them as being pro-Hamas, anti-Semites, haters of Israel, whatever the fuck else. This is where he's at, guys. Another one here. So this was an interesting moment because he basically, in his attempt to praise Miriam Adelson, okay, he basically like attacked veterans, wounded veterans, veterans who have been killed in combat. He basically downplayed their, Medal of Honor by trying to compliment Miriam Adelson, who they gave a Medal of Freedom. So let's go ahead and listen to this clip real quick.
I have to say, Miriam, I watched Sheldon sitting so proud in the White House when we gave Miriam the Presidential Medal of Freedom. That's the highest award you can get as a civilian. It's the equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor, but civilian version. It's actually much better because everyone gets the Congressional Medal of Honor. That's soldiers. They're either in very bad shape because they've been hit so many times by bullets, or they're dead. She gets it, and she's a healthy, beautiful woman. It's right.
All right. So the Medal of Freedom that was given to Miriam Adelson for some fucking reason is outweighing the Medal of Honor, which is given to wounded or killed veterans. And these are the same people who are attacking Tim Walz, saying that he walked out on his troops who ended up going to Iraq after 20 plus years of service in the military. Okay. In response to all of that, we also had this here from JD Vance, who was questioned about this. Now, we just watched the clip from Trump. We all just saw exactly what he said, right? Let's go ahead and see how JD Vance is asked about this situation and how he tries to do the cleanup for this.
And veterans have pointed out, he said that the civilian presidential honor is better than what wounded veterans have received. And I wondered, what do you say to veterans who think that's demeaning?
Well, look, I was with a group of veterans in Pennsylvania yesterday, and trust me, the veteran community is very, very much behind Donald Trump. So, look, what I would say to people is, look, what President Trump said during a ceremony, and I haven't seen the entire remarks, but my understanding is President Trump said during a ceremony that a person who received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, he was saying some nice things about her. He was saying some complimentary things about her. Donald Trump, I've seen give out a Congressional Medal of Honor. I've seen him give out a number of awards and commendations to military veterans. And, of course, I myself am a Marine Corps veteran of the Iraq War. This is a guy who loves our veterans and who honors our veterans. I don't think him complimenting and saying a nice word about a person who received the Presidential Medal of Freedom is in any way denigrating those who received military honors. They're two different awards, and I think the president was saying some nice things about a person that he liked, and that's a totally reasonable thing to do.
So I guess the strategy here is just to lie about it, right? I mean, we all just saw the clip. We all just saw exactly what Trump said. He was, making a direct comparison between the Medal of Freedom, and the Medal of Honor, right? He was saying, well, the guys who got the Medal of Honor, they were filled with bullets, right? They're wounded or they're dead. And Miriam Adelson got the Medal of Freedom and she's in pristine condition. So that's obviously better, right? That's what he was just saying. We all just watched the fucking clip. And JD's going to sit up here and I guess he's trying to say, oh, well, this is some sort of a media creation maybe? Or this just came out of nowhere. Trump was just applauding his friend, right? He wasn't attacking people who got the Medal of Freedom. I don't know. It's all just kind of pathetic. You guys tell me. Now, to finish off here, we have Miriam herself, who gave part of the speech at this, or spoke at part of this event, and she praised Donald Trump for all of the things that he did for Israel. So let's listen to this real quick.
That president is Donald Trump. He promised to recognize Jerusalem and to move the embassy to Jerusalem. Promise kept. He promised to withdraw from Iran nuclear deal, and promise kept. He promised to bring peace between Israel and Arab nations. Promise kept. And all in Golan Heights, that was a big gift. He promised Golan Heights, and he recognized. And all of this he did in his first term while battling COVID pandemic, race riots, and the liberal media.
Oh my God. Okay, so sure, I mean, she's right. He did all of those things, right? He did all of those things. He got hundreds of millions of dollars for Republicans, for himself, from the Adelsons, and he turned around. He illegally recognized the, Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. He withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, which, by the way, was actually working in terms of, if your priority is to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, right? That was actually on pace. It was working. He tore it up into shreds because he didn't like the fact that it was negotiated under Obama. He said, we're going to get a much better deal. What happened? What happened to that? He then went on to assassinate Qasem Soleimani, almost dragging us into war with Iran. Again, as she pointed out there, the Abraham Accords, again, the Golan Heights, the moving the embassy to Jerusalem. All of these things you could make a strong case for, especially moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and recognizing the capital. Like, all of these things help to lay the groundwork for October 7th, because the Trump administration policy in regards to Palestinians was just to sweep them under the rug. It was just to pretend as if they didn't exist, right? To steamroll over them. And so that's how you end up with a situation like October 7th in the first place. It doesn't come out of a vacuum. So, I mean, there you have it. We also have, by the way, I covered this in a previous video, but Miriam Adelson, apparently, according to the reports behind the scenes, is one of her demands for backing Trump again with $100 million in this election cycle. One of the demands is that he starts to recognize, right, and to stop, doing this sort of bullshit surface level pushing back against the Israeli settlements in the West Bank. So I guess that's what they're getting in return for this $100 million this time around is, if Trump wins, then the U.S. is not even going to pretend to oppose the illegal West Bank settlement expansion that the Israeli government is doing, a slow-rolling ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians in the West Bank. So that's apparently what is on the table for this next $100 million. So there you have it, guys. Nothing really surprising here, just more like, okay, here's another example of Trump saying the quiet part out loud, being pretty anti-Semitic himself while pretending as if he's the greatest champion in fighting anti-Semitism. What he means is that he gets money from these kinds of groups, and he turns around and he does their bidding, right? He's in the pocket of the Israeli government, through and through.
Politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying